Center of Hyderabad. Okay. I am placed in center of Hyderabad.
Sure.
I am Canada. So keeping in that view,
Great.
I thought I will keep till my death a clinic cum residence. This
Very
is my clinic cum residence.
Very happy.
Non-clinical hours, I maintain the same as a studio for singing. That is a life beyond ophthalmology is singing and practicing atmosphere.
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you,
I
sir.
remember
Great,
we have
sir.
interacted
Nice
earlier
meeting
also,
you.
sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So,
Good evening.
Sir, good.
Hello, sir.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, boss.
Good evening. Hi, good evening. We are waiting for you.
No need to
Good
wait.
evening, sir. Good evening.
Yes, you are busy today. Yesterday I saw that so much busy. So I could talk to you.
Sir, good evening, sir. Good evening.
Every
Good
minute
evening.
I'm using.
Hi, Abhishek. Good evening.
Your volume is a bit low, sir. Little nearer you come.
Now okay?
Now better.
Yes, okay. Sir, how are you?
Hi. Introduce yourself.
Dr. Katta, how are you?
Nice, sir. Thank you. Always happy because of you only. You're the inspirator.
Thank you.
Always.
Yeah. Yes.
Today we have lost a legend, Dilip Kumar.
Yeah.
Mhm. Legend of Hindi picture.
Yes. He was not well.
He was not well. Yeah. He had some respiratory problems. 1 month back he was admitted. Recovered a little bit. Again, 7 days back he was admitted. I think he could not sustain. He had some respiratory problems.
Dilip Kumar used to come with what's his wife's name? Saira Banu.
Saira.
Sairaban.
Saira Banu, he actually Dilip Kumar came with his mother-in-law.
Oh.
Mother-in-law only, I think. Yeah.
You have seen him?
Yeah,
Dilip
yeah, I
Kumar?
know him. I know
But
him.
acha. But you have not shared a photo.
No, I think photo I didn't take, I think.
Acha.
Because that time the problem was that Saira Banu's mother was very brittle and she was so much troubling. IV line, FFA, patient is seen in London, then kidney problem like that. She was a real problematic in dealing.
The stars, they have some lot of problems.
Yeah. Runali, I'm just starting the session. I told Siddhita I'll
So, can we have other people who are introducing who are there? We have very limited.
So now we got to 28 now.
Sir, it's already 7, so
Yeah,
I think we can
I
start
think
now.
we start the
Yes.
program. Yeah. So right.
Good evening, Kiparani. Thank you. We'll start now. So, on behalf of Tele-Ophthalmic Society of India and ECHO India, and we are actually launching the first session of the certificate course on prevention of diabetic blindness, ECHO. And this is the first one, and we had a preliminary meeting, and we have the none other than Dr. Rajiv Raman, who's well established himself as working on diabetic retinopathy for the past few decades in Shankar Nethralaya. I think he's one person with more than 100 publications only on diabetic retinopathy, and that's a real, and that also in high impact journals. And his work will speak, and I think he's speaking. And today he's going to talk on with a didactic lecture, followed by a case presentation by himself, and then question and answer, which will be after the talk. And the today's, I think I'll ask Dr. Rajiv Raman to start. And Subudhi, before that, you want to say a few words as Secretary of the Tele-Ophthalmic Society?
Yeah. I will say a few words. Then I'll go and share the screen then first. Okay. So on behalf of Tele-Ophthalmic Society of India, I welcome you all for the first session, launching the first session of the certificate course on prevention of diabetic blindness. And today's topic being diabetic macular edema. And we have planned at least fortnightly once for next 4 to 5 months, the series of programs by all the experts every 15 days on Wednesdays, 7 to 8 p.m. under the ECO platform. This is a really very interesting program because we want to go practically to the people, the doctors who are interested for the learning diabetic retinopathy and how to diagnose easily and how to manage the diabetic retinopathy. Today's topic is based on the diabetic macular edema, mostly didactic lecture followed by case presentation by our expert, Dr. Rajiv Raman, and we are the facilitators, myself with our president, Tusi, Dr. S. Natarajan, and my treasurer, Dr. Sabyasachi Patnaik. And of course, question answer session, all the panelists will be Dr. Kim, our president-elect, Dr. Senthil, Dr. Sheila John, Dr. Sandeepak Rai, Dr. Abhishek, Dr. Ashok Nanda, Dr. Kavita Rao. So those will be joining shortly and they will be the panelists and they will be answering all the questions. So all the spokes who will be attending here today, let them be free enough to ask questions. So mostly it is by them and not for us. So people must do not feel shy to ask questions. And today's expert already, Dr. Natarajan said many things about him. So I have to also say a few things about Dr. Rajiv Raman. Is a senior consultant in Vitretina services at Shankara. However, his objective is mainly, I'll tell you about it includes the patient care, ophthalmic research, community services, and education. Community services, yes, he has done a lot of work on diabetic retinopathy, and of course, ophthalmic research. If you see his publications, his presentations, and his a lot of research fellows, everything you speak about his volume of work, research work he's doing in the last 20 years at Shankara. So he has acquired different positions in various departments of ophthalmology in Shankara. He received so many grants as the principal investigator or the co-investigator in different grant agencies all over the world. His area of interest in scientific collaborations in different countries, including Chinese University, Hong Kong University, Singapore University, all the universities, he has a lot of projects. And his academic interest is basically diabetic retinopathy and how to do telescreening also, not only diabetic retinopathy, also ROP. He has written 7 chapters in books, 7 books, and also 281 peer-reviewed publications. You said 100, it's more than that, 281, sir. And he has presented papers in more than 87 conferences all over the world, and a lot of honors he has received for his work in excellency, sincerity, and dedication. With these few words, I welcome Dr. Rajiv Raman to this program to speak something about the diabetic macular edema, followed by questions by our spokes. So just shortly, half second or 1 second, half minute, each one of the spokes, please introduce yourself, starting from, yes, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Please come with the video and introduce yourself. Yes, Mr. Dinesh. Okay, Mr. Dinesh Kumar, say something about you. Where are you? Okay, Karandeep Kapoor,
Yes, sir.
please.
Okay, sir. Hello. Okay, sir. I am Dr. Kanavdeep Kapoor. I'm a second-year postgraduate in ophthalmology, currently in ESCOMS, Jammu. And sir, right now I have been posted in I am attending my district residency program in Kishtwar district.
Okay. Next, Mr.
Very good.
Akash. Mr. Akash.
Dr. Aditi has raised her hand.
Okay, please.
Yeah, Aditi.
Dr. Aditi.
Good evening,
Yes.
everyone. This
Yeah,
is Dr.
please.
This is Dr. Aditi Khajuria, PG Ophthalmology from ESCOMS, currently PG second year. Thank you, sir.
Thank
Okay,
you.
nice.
Thank you.
Right. Anybody else? Mr. Akash. Akash, Neha, Gayatri. Yes, anybody, please do come. Speak yourself. Introduce yourself, please.
I am Gayatri from Tanjavur Medical College, third year postgraduate in MS Ophthalmology.
Gayatri. Yes, anybody else?
Postgraduate.
Yes, sir. Tausif Khan, B Optum, M Optum from SRMS Institute of Medical Sciences. Currently working as low vision specialist and consultant optometrist at my own clinic, Drishti Eye Clinic.
Thank you, Tosif.
Okay. Thank- Anybody else? Dr. Shilpa? Dr. Shilpa?
Dr. Neha raised her hand.
Two people have raised their hands.
Please.
Neha.
Neha
Good
Adal.
evening, sir. Myself, Dr. Neha Adlakha, working as assistant professor in medical college in Haryana.
Which medical college?
Shahid Hassan Khan Mewati, GMC Mewat.
Mewar.
Yes, sir.
Very good.
Okay. Anybody
Yeah,
else?
we have here hand raised, please, sir.
Please.
Sir, good evening, sir. I'm Dr. Neha Kamalni. We are fellow from Shankar Netralaya.
Great.
Thank you.
We have a doctor here who raised his name is not the Samsung Galaxy S7H. Yeah. Please.
Unmute yourself first.
Unmute yourself.
I am Dr. Sajad Sood, PG second year, Department of Ophthalmology in Ascom, Jammu.
Where?
Jammu.
Jammu. Okay.
Hello, we are from Jammu only, sir.
Very good.
Dr. Aditi, Dr. Sajad, and Dr. Kannav. So all
Yes,
three are
sir.
very bright PG students.
Very
Yes,
good.
sir.
Very good.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Very good. So I think whoever has not mentioned, can I request them to write in the chat so that
Chat.
somebody
Yes.
knows? In the meantime,
Okay.
I think Dr. Rajiv, you can start. the
Yeah.
Thanks for that kind introduction. And next couple of minutes, I'll be trying to share some thoughts on diabetic macular edema. I've tried to include the cases within the presentation itself, so it's not a didactic talk as such. You'll have some of the cases and some theory on what diabetic macular edema is. And as you know, this certificate course is mainly directed towards prevention of blindness due to diabetic retinopathy. And there are two important reasons why a diabetic person develops vision impairment: diabetic macular edema and proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And I'll be dealing one of them, how we manage diabetic macular edema today in our clinical practice. So there are a lot of evidences in the literature. If you just type up a keyword diabetic retinopathy, you can see even this year there has been about 1,500 publications which talk about diabetic retinopathy as such. Versus there are some certain times consensus guideline. So evidences and consensus are a very different thing. Evidence is something you have a study question, you try to answer it. But there are certain gray zones where we really don't have very clear evidence, or the practice is a bit different. So that's the reason another thing comes, that is the consensus guideline. And why in diabetic macular edema you have consensus guideline? Because there are ethnic differences. There are differences in the risk factors. The phenotypic differences, what macular edema we see here and what they see in US is pretty different. It's not the exact same phenotype which we see. The socioeconomic differences are different. So it may not be that whatever true in the Western world can be practiced in our country. There are practice pattern also is very different among the ophthalmologists in the country. And again, regulatory differences. Like if you look at aflibercept, which was considered as one of the treatment modality in central involving diabetic macular edema, and European guideline, everywhere it is one of the drug of choice. In India, till very late, last couple of months, that has got approval for diabetic macular edema. So even though it may be a very good drug, but we were not using it, though it was used as an off-label medication, correct? That's the reason there are a couple of these guidelines which have come up, the American guideline, EURETINA, NEFIS guideline, all these guidelines are there. And even the Indian Journal or AIOS guidelines, VRSI guidelines. There are a couple of these guidelines which are there. So I will cover these sections as far as managing DME is concerned. First is the initial workup, and definitely history taking is a very important thing. We should not miss the clues which we get in this. You want to know about duration of diabetes. We know diabetic retinopathy. Dr. Padmaja in the next series would be talking about epidemiology and risk factor, but it's one of the strongest risk factor is duration of diabetes. You want to know what medications they are on. Insulin, oral hypoglycemics, antihypertensive, lipid lowering drugs, all are very crucial. Many times you would also like to know whether there has been a recent change in medication, a switch from an oral hypoglycemic to insulin. There will be a sudden lowering of blood sugar, and that can cause actually a worsening of retinopathy. Many times a moderate NPDR, you had seen, and a couple of months later, 1 or 2 months, he comes with macular edema. You check the history, there may be a history of very tight control of diabetes, which may be the reason why he has developed it. Any change in medications. All other microangiopathies also have an effect on diabetic macular edema. You want to know about renal disease, cardiovascular event, anything has happened, systemic hypertension. Again, serum lipids are important. And if it's a pregnancy, your way you manage diabetic macular edema would change a bit. You must be aware that you must keep in mind that there are certain drugs too, which can cause macular edema. The thiazolidine diones, these are the glutazones. It's not alone that, but many like fingolimod is an anti-cancer drug which is used, tamoxifen, taxanes, and more common is niacin. If a person is on niacin, that can also cause a macular edema, or a prostaglandin analog. All these causes macular edema, and it's important to stop these medications, and you will be treating these macular edema thinking that it is attributed to diabetes, and you will continue giving anti-VEGF, though just by stopping this medication, the macular edema can reduce. You want to know detail about any recent ocular surgery. You want to know whether you are dealing with a post-cataract surgery macular edema versus a macular edema which is due to diabetes. You want to know the details of previous history of any laser, what were the indication it was done. And the next part is a very important part, a detailed history of previous intravitreal injections. Many times when the patient comes to you with multiple injection, he has taken at least 10 intravitreal injection, and now he has switched over to many drugs and still has a macular edema. Systemic control is good. At that time, you want to take this detailed history. You want to know whether there was some drug which he really improved. Secondly, you also want to know how compliant he was with his injections, whether he was getting it on a regular monthly interval or he had 5-6 months gap. You want to know the number of injections, the subjective response after injection, whether he felt any improvement. And many times you may think of using the same drug in this case when he comes to you after a couple of months. You want to know the compliance of treatment. So history definitely is a very important thing and gives us a lot of clue while we are managing diabetic macular edema. So let me share a case, a 54-year-old gentleman, 7 years diabetes, reasonably good control HbA1c. Right eye had no diabetic retinopathy, left eye had moderate non-proliferative retinopathy with macular edema. Vision in the right eye was 6.6, left eye was 6.12, and he had received 5 injections, intravitreal injections of bevacizumab in the left eye. When he presented to us, he has this small cyst, which is in the inner ring, I would say just next to juxtafoveal cystic space, which is there. Still, he has distortions, vision is not good. And when we took the history, one of the tablet was glitazone as one of the oral hypoglycemic drug. We didn't inject this time. We just asked him to stop this medication. And 2 months later, he comes with a flat macula. So it's not important that all macular edema, you have to give injection. Good history is the clue. And there are evidences that if thiazolidine diones are used along with insulin, they increase the risk of diabetic macular edema in type 2 diabetes. A lot of evidence on this is currently available. Coming to the imaging in diabetic macular edema. So when will you ask for imaging? You want to do prior to initiation of a therapy to delineate both diabetic retinopathy staging and also the stage how the diabetic macular edema is. You repeat it as needed as the event of non-responsiveness to the therapy or monitoring of the patient during the treatment. When you are giving anti-VEGF, you want to know whether he is responding or not. Or if you've done a laser, you want to know what happens to him, whether these non-center involving macular edema has resolved. Sometimes you want to also do a wide field fundus fluorescein angiogram or a fundus photograph, because now we know that a third of these diabetic retinopathy have actually peripheral lesions which are not picked up on our routine photographs. Sometimes we just do a fundus photography on them. You want to assess the accuracy of adequacy of your panretinal photocoagulation, or you want to know, is there any subtle neovascularization which is picked up? So this is a wide field fundus fluorescein angiogram. You can see nasally an NVE, which would have probably missed. It was not very much evident on clinical evaluation. And sometimes when the fluorescein angiogram is not taken with all the fields, you may miss this NVE. In a case of non-response to anti-VEGF, do angiogram, you can see many of the leaking microaneurysm, probably also amenable to laser. So I think when the patient is not responding to your anti-VEGF, it's a good idea to do a fundus fluorescein angiogram. This is an image of a wide field photography taken by Claris, very high resolution image. And sometimes you may not need to these subtle NVs. You can even look into these pictures and ascertain whether you are having any NVE or lesions in the mid periphery. This is an Optos image where we have just seen, because to see the adequacy of PRP, where the skip areas are. So if you look at the superior arcade, the area between the arcade and the laser marks, there is a skip area, there is an area which is left. And if this patient had active NVEs, this would be the area you would tend to treat. Even temporally, it is little far. Still, there is a scope for more treatment. OCT is a gold standard today. There are two entities which we were never able to see before the advent of optical coherence tomography in diabetic macular edema: neurosensory detachment and tractional component. Just on clinical evaluation, though sometimes we were looking at tractional when there is a visible traction, but the vitreomacular adhesion, vitreomacular subtle tractions were often missed. And now this is one of the classification which people use, whether it is a vasogenic or a non-vasogenic variety. Vasogenic are the ones where you have these cystic spaces, you have leaking microaneurysms, and they are the ones which respond pretty well to anti-VEGF therapy. A non-vasogenic, on the contrary, will not show so much of edema, not have so many of leaking microaneurysms. Again, the response, though previously we used to call diffuse and focal, but these are the edemas who don't respond very well. And if there is a tractional component, as in this case, if you look at fundus photograph, many times very difficult to, in this picture, we are able to see a tractional component epiretinal membrane. Many times it is difficult to ascertain it. OCT plays an important role. So what is the role of OCT in your management of a case of diabetic macular edema? When to do? Definitely at baseline, you want to do a OCT to assess the varieties which I told. You want to know the morphology of edema, whether there is a neurosensory detachment, traction, and all other things. You want to do it on monthly visits when they are coming for your injection to know the response, whether it's a poor response or a non-response to the therapy or a good response. And definitely when there is a poor response, you want to do a OCT. What to look for? You want to look for the quantitative parameters and certain qualitative parameters. Quantitative parameters are the central retinal thickness, a central subfield thickness. If you see this map, which shows these circles, the ETDRS rings, the central one is called as a central subfield thickness. And that's what you want to look at when you are treating diabetic macular edema. You want to see the response of treatment. You want to look at this value. qualitative measures, you want to try to look for some markers on OCT which can give some idea whether the patient will improve vision or not. And you want to look at some markers whether the patient will respond to your treatment with steroid, anti-VEGF or surgery. So the markers for prediction of response we look at I don't know, I think some slides were hidden. Let me just, because there were markers for response to. Yeah. Can you see the slides?
Yes, sir.
No, sir.
Yes, Rajiv.
Yes, sir.
Proceed.
I think for some talk I had hidden these three, but I'll show. So these are the response for vision. You want to look at what is called as drill. Drill is nothing but a disorganization of the inner retinal layer. So you can see my marker. These are the inner layers. These are the outer layers. And if you can make all the layers of the retina in the inner layer, that means you're able to segment the inner layers. There is no drill, and they are associated with a better vision as compared to those where you are unable to segment these inner layers. The outcome is poorer. And where this is important, 1 minute. This is important to look at in the central area, the central 1 millimeter. So in the central 1 millimeter, if drill is present, this is a marker that the patient will not recover good vision. You also want to look for this marker called as the ELM disruption or loss of ISOS. You want to look at this layer, and if you see discontinuity in the external
slideshow.
Yeah, see, this slide is hidden. That's why it is showing. Let me do this. Wait.
Okay.
Can you see this? No.
Yeah, I can see. I thought slideshow. No problem.
What I will do is how I can unhide it. I can unhide it and then show it as a unskipped line. Yeah. Now I can show it as a
yes.
So this is the ELM disruption which I was talking about, and that's again something which is associated with a poor vision. Another thing, you want to look into this outer layers. You have all the three, the external limiting membrane, the RP, this all looks parallel. The moment this parallelism is lost, again, they are the patients who have poor visual outcome. So these markers are important to look for when you are doing a OCT, because you can do some amount of prediction whether patient will improve vision or not. There are markers which can predict the response of the treatment. So after anti-VEGF, if you have more central macular thickness, the response is better because there is more thing to reduce. So definitely more central macular thickness will have a better response to anti-VEGF. Presence of hard exudates again have been shown to respond to anti-VEGF. Neurosensory detachment is something which is, it shows response to both. It is one of the first thing which we give, which goes away the moment you give anti-VEGF or steroid. However, presence of epiretinal membrane is a poor response. Presence of hyperreflective dots, the small dots in the retinal layer, which don't cast shadow on the outer retina. In contrast to hard exudates, which cast a shadow on larger ones. So we have to differentiate these hyperreflective dots, and these dots actually reflect more of inflammatory mediators. And these are the ones which again show if you have more of them, you'll have a poor response to an anti-VEGF injection. Or if you have an angio-OCT and you see an enlarged deep capillary plexus, again, sometimes difficult to know in presence of macular edema. But if it is, you see a lot of these deep capillary plexus areas which are ischemic, again, the response to anti-VEGF is poor. For steroid, again, neurosensory detachment is something which responds pretty well. Hyperreflective dots, they show a good response because, as I told you, they are more indicative of inflammatory pathology. Hard exudates, even the plaque on the macula, they respond pretty well to steroids. Even with anti-VEGF, hard exudates respond, but they need a little more number of injections as compared to steroid. As far as the non-response of steroid, it's the ELM and ellipsoid zone integrity. If they are lost, usually the response to these steroids are poor. Coming to laser in diabetic macular edema, the role of laser has really reduced, and it is now limited to what we call as a non-center involving macular edema. When it is not involved that central subfield, which you had seen in that circle, and it's beyond that, these are the cases. Again, what is the cutoff to define whether it is central involving, non-center involving? In general, it depends on machine and the population. So it should be two standard deviation to that population. On average, about 300 microns is something which people use. Depending on the machine, it may vary. So what is the role of laser today? So the role of laser is mainly in the non-center involving diabetic macular edema, or there is a very minimum center involvement and central foveal thickness, subfield thickness is less than 300 microns. You can still think, or when you have these clear succinates of, because usually the leaking microorganism is in the center of these succinates. These are again the ones where laser can be done pretty well, and they respond well to laser. There are evidences now that sometimes the thought is that can we continue injecting, and once you have a center involving, can we combine it with laser? Will it give some visual benefit? The number of injection reducing? The answer what we have from clinical trials is no. You don't get any visual benefit by adding laser to anti-VEGF. Also, these studies have shown that it doesn't actually reduce the number of injections. So yes, if it is a non-responder, definitely you can think of adding laser. But if he is responding, it doesn't make sense that you combine laser with anti-VEGF with the hope that it will cause more benefit in terms of vision or the number of injections. Coming to the role of anti-VEGF in diabetic macular edema, anti-VEGF injections, there are a lot of evidences, and I'll just give some key points regarding anti-VEGF. So many of these studies have shown that anti-VEGF causes a sustained vision gain, which is definitely superior to laser. The vision gain is also sustained for a long time. We have now many studies, RESTORE, RISE, RIDE, which are 5-year and above follow-up. So it is sustained for a longer time. We also know that requirement of injection reduces every year. So many of these trials have shown that the requirement reduces in second year, it reduces further, third year it further reduces, but it's important they do need injection in the second and third year too. Now that's very important when you are counseling these patients. You should not tell this magic number of 3, that 3 injections your macular edema will go. You have to definitely say that first year you will need couple of injections, next year it will be less, by third year you will need still less. So they are mentally prepared that this is not a one-time treatment. Again, as I mentioned, the combining laser doesn't reduce the burden of injection or will give better visual result. RISE and RIDE also told us that even in an untreated eye, it's never too late to start intravitreal injection. And even in a lasered eye, it is never too late to start injection, though the visual gain which you get may not be as a treatment naive eyes, but still there is a gain. So don't deny these patients of intravitreal injection that he has already been treated, I should not give. There are some evidence now that in a thicker retina and poor vision, probably ranibizumab and aflibercept fare better than bevacizumab. And another good thing is that in about a third patients with giving these continued anti-VEGF injection, there is a reduction in severity of DR, meaning a person with a severe NPDR can become moderate NPDR, a third of them. So that's something which that these trials have shown. We used to, whenever both macular edema and PRP and PDR used to happen together, the traditional teaching was that you do a nasal PRP and treat the macula. But with this anti-VEGF, Protocol J has told that you can combine PRP with intravitreal anti-VEGF so that there is no exacerbation of macular edema. Again, this was a good trial. Now it has gradually moved into proliferative retinopathy, the role of anti-VEGF, and this study protocol S showed that in the eyes with PDR and diabetic macular edema, at 5 years, there is non-inferiority of anti-VEGF alone over combination with PRP. That means both seems to work similar. And recently, another protocol gave us one good guideline that eyes with center involving DME with a good vision. Many times patient has a very good vision. There is no advantage of giving injection or laser. Observation is good enough. However, these are the patients you want to follow up every month. You don't want to leave them because they can, the moment they have vision loss, they need treatment. So how will you know that which patient will have vision loss? Very recently, Protocol V came out with a subgroup analysis, and they found 2 risk factors: old age and the more severe stage of diabetic retinopathy. Means if a person has already a severe NPDR, you want to definitely call him more often. The chance of conversion to a CI-DME with a vision loss is much higher in them. These are these references. So I would encourage all of you to go through many of these DRCR studies. Today, the way we are managing diabetic macular edema is very much governed by the findings of these studies. So what is the role of steroids in managing diabetic macular edema? So definitely you can use steroids in cases where anti-VEGF are to be avoided. Where you want to avoid, wherever there is a history of recent cardiovascular or cerebrovascular event. How recent? 3 months. Previously it was 6 months, now it is 3 months. You also can try steroids in cases where effect seems to be similar to anti-VEGF. And one of the protocol called as Protocol I showed us that in pseudophakic eyes, ranibizumab and steroid seems to give a similar result. Again, there are some cases where there seems to be some benefit of steroid. So there was this Champlain study which showed that in vitrectomized eye, where you don't have a vitreous sump, the drug goes away quickly. Probably steroid stays for a little longer time and you can have a good effect. Or when you have this plaque of hard exudate, where you also want to know the systemic status, you want to see how well the lipids are controlled. In these cases also, probably steroid plays an important role. You want these, though, as I told you, even the anti-VEGFs take care, but you don't want these hard exudate plaque for a very long time on the macula because they in a longer time cause a macular scarring. So let's see how will you manage a DME in a pseudophakic eye. So this was a case, a 58-year-old gentleman, diabetic since 20 years, hypertensive since last 10 years, had reduced vision in both eyes. Vision is 636, and he had 3 months back a cataract surgery, fake IOL, and you can see a picture like this. Okay, so sorry. So this patient has cystoid macular edema, very typical of Irwin gash, but also has features of diabetic retinopathy. You have leaking microaneurysms, which are contributing to edema. So he has both DME and pseudophakic macular edema. In contrast, another gentleman, this case, if you look at, he's a gentleman, 62-year-old female, 18 years diabetic, vision is poor, pseudophakic, and had a cataract surgery 8 years back. If you look at this, this is only diabetic macular edema. There is no pseudophakic macular edema component. So again, how to differentiate both? One is you want to look for other lesions for diabetic retinopathy. The second one, as you know, the pseudophakic macular edema is an inflammatory pathology. So in the late stages of angiogram, you will see a disc staining, which is very typical of inflammatory pathologies, which you don't see in diabetic macular edema. So another indication where, you can use steroid are the non-responders, and there are a lot of studies which have shown, and DRCR-NET protocol I did said that the response can be a limited or a partial response to anti-VEGF, and majority of them. If you look at slow and variable response or a non-responder, nearly a third of the patients have this type of a behavior in our clinical practice. When to switch or when to think that this anti-VEGF is not working? Dr. Praveen Duggal's work has very clearly shown that response at 3 months usually predicts the final response. So if you have good response after at the 3 months, you know that this patient is more or less going to do well. If it's not doing well, you can think of switching either to a steroid or any other anti-VEGF. So let me take you across to one case which will give a lot of learning. So this was a 67-year-old lady, diabetic since 17 years, poorly controlled diabetes, had 3 intravitreal injections in both eyes in last 6 months. So probably every second month or 1.5 months, patient was going for a checkup, had no improvement after these 3 injections in the right eye, and he felt that there was some improvement in the left eye. Look at vision 624 N12, 612 N12, macular edema, both eye has got a macular edema. So you start looking at, yes, compliance is pretty good, has been coming regularly. And there has been no response to 3 anti-VEGFs in the right eye. Left eye probably has a partial response. And because the left eye was improving, I had looked into the old OCT pictures. We continued giving anti-VEGF, and right eye, we thought we'll switch to Ozurdex. That's a Dex implant. So this was a picture 1 month after injection. The right eye, you see vision improve, the edema reduced, and left eye, he is 4 status anti-VEGF injections now. And we thought at this stage, 1 month, why we called at 1 month? Usually steroids, we call a little later because one eye we were treating with anti-VEGF. And this is a time we stopped giving anti-VEGF to her in this eye. And we called her again. And then he came at 3rd month post Ozurdex. Everything was stable. Even macular edema was stable in the left eye. And we did no intervention. And patient came after 2 months. That's about 5 to 6 months from the initial injection. And the picture is same. So this 5 months post Ozurdex in the right eye, left eye has been responding to anti-VEGF. And both eyes, there is macular edema. We repeated Ozurdex in the right eye and anti-VEGF in the left eye. And next month, everything again settled down. Right eye, the macular edema is reducing. You can see if you start looking at left eye, you can see some ISOS disruption, though the vision is still maintaining pretty well. He comes back at 3rd month. Right eye vision is, it's 2 months post Ozurdex. Again, we have been observing him. And then he became lost to follow-up and comes again 6 months post Ozurdex. Right eye vision is poor, again macular edema. Left eye, after this couple of injection, 5-6 anti-VEGFs, he has been maintaining. The macular edema is not increased. So we just observed this eye. Again was given Ozurdex, comes again. Right eye has been, whenever he comes with the right eye having macular edema, he responds to Ozurdex and edema again comes back after 2 to 3 months. In this course, he comes back to us again, and this time we see some neovascularization. Both eyes have converted to a proliferative retinopathy. And again, if you look at right eye having edema, left eye macular edema more or less subsided. So underwent a pan-retinal photocoagulation. Right eye developed a bit of tractional element at this stage, but however, vision was still maintaining to 618. We didn't do anything. Left eye had become stable. Right eye, we did some focal because we found some focal on the angiogram and we treated focal leaks in the right eye. He comes back after a couple of 2-3 months after this with reasonably good macular edema resolution in both the eyes. Right eye, because of probably this ISOS problem, he's not having a very good vision. Left eye having good vision. And then he continues his care. So that is the journey of a patient of diabetic macular edema. There are some nuggets which we get from this case. One is we need to individualize the treatment protocol. We may have many guidelines, but every patient behaves differently. Look for OCT markers of visual impairment, vision and anatomical response. Monitor during course of disease, progression to PDR. Don't forget, just keep on injecting. You know that with time, the disease also progresses. The stage of retinopathy also progresses. And in non-responders, steroid does play a role. Again, in even responders, this patient required injections in the 2nd year too. So you need to counsel him in the starting so that he complies with your treatment. coming to the last part, systemic control and diabetic macular edema. I'm not going in detail, but definitely all these parameters play a very important role. Maybe glycemic control, control of hypertension, control of his serum lipids, the dyslipidemia, and the care for his nephropathy and anemia. And usually it's a combined care of a nephrologist, a diabetologist, a physician, and an ophthalmologist. You can give these patients a very good vision and a good life. Just give one example. This was a gentleman, 55-year-old gentleman, poorly controlled, 8 HbA1c, fasting sugar 350, serum creatinine high, and you see this type of a picture. So if you look at how it is different, though there are changes of diabetic retinopathy, you are having also these cotton wool spots, peripapillary cotton wool spots, which suggest more towards hypertensive changes. You're also seeing these superficial hemorrhages, which are more towards hypertension. And this patient, because of his poorly controlled systemic parameters, we just said control these. So, and again, another clue is this neurosensory detachment. Do a OCT and you get large neurosensory detachment. Usually it's a systemic abnormalities. So we didn't treat this patient. If you see, the retina is more or less compact, though you have some cystic spaces above the neurosensory detachment. In this case, we just asked him to get a good control of his systemic status, and he comes back again with a fairly good macular edema has subsided. So no injections here, just with a good control of his systemic status, we could very well control this patient. So this shows it's not important. You have to see beyond eye whenever you're dealing with these patients of diabetic macular edema. So this is the EURETINA algorithm, or even I would say we also follow the similar thing. So you evaluate the patient, glycemic control, diabetic complications, comorbidities, a good slit lamp biomicroscopy, visual acuity, OCT plus minus FA, and if you have OCTA, do that. And then you can observe if there is no loss or less than 5-letter loss, you can observe these patients. You classify DME into a center involving or a non-center involving. Center involving, again, you have actually 3 choices. You can do laser, you can observe these patients, or you can use Nevanac or a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. In these cases, usually the vision is good. The reason why you want to treat is you don't want them to progress to a center involving DME over a period of time, because nearly 40 to 50% of them over 2 years develop center involving macular edema. So you want to have both, either treat with laser or a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. And if there is a center involving, you want to know whether there is a history of some major cardiovascular, cerebrovascular event or not. If there is a history, you tend to avoid anti-VEGFs. You can think of steroid if there is no other contraindication. And if there is no history of major event, pseudophakic or a phakic eye, pseudophakic, you can still think of using steroid or anti-VEGF. Phakic eye, definitely you want to do anti-VEGF therapy. And if he's non-responding, that is a time you can think of adding laser or corticosteroids. Fluocinolone we don't have, but that's something which is, we don't, that's what I was telling. Many times you cannot practice what is practiced outside, because this drug has not yet come to our Indian market, which lasts for a little longer time. If there is a tractional element, again, you try to avoid anti-VEGF to some extent. However, if it's a very thin ERM, you still can try anti-VEGF, and if they don't respond, they are the ideal candidates to pars plana vitrectomy and removal of these membranes. So it's not only understanding these you need to understand these guidelines which are currently there, and I would also encourage all of you to read the guidelines which are there, which mainly for diabetic retinopathy. Today AIOS guidelines are mainly on screening, but definitely there are DME guidelines on the way. You will see these guidelines, understand them, ensure that you try to follow these so that you can give a good care. And counseling is an important factor, because majority of treatment failure in these cases are because of poor compliance. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to take any questions. I think I've covered some cases and dietetic together.
Yes, it's excellent, excellent presentation with a lot of, cases. So, anyone, any questions?
Excellent, Rajiv.
Thank you, sir.
Really, I think I learned a lot. I don't know about others.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
happy. I'm with the postgraduates.
So just to initiate the discussion, I want to ask a question. You have never uttered CSME. We are very comfortable
CSME
with.
Yes, CSME was a term which we were using more when we were doing laser. Today, with anti-VEGF as a primary agent, the focus has changed. Definitely for all postgraduates, the definitions are very important. Keep that in mind.
That's correct.
We cannot avoid.
Yes.
So no one should think that CSME has lost its relevance.
Yes. It has to some extent because now the treatment is not based on that. But yes, that is something from examination point of view. Definitely. There are 3 participants who have raised hands. Who are the ones? Let me see. Rajwinder.
Yeah.
Sir, I want to know, is there any role of in watching the diabetic macular edema?
You need to see if they are on glitter. See what happened in between. Glitazons were banned in India.
Rajiv,
Yeah.
I want to introduce you, Professor Rajwinder. She is in Ludhiana, in a professor in medical college, and last time she came for the preliminary meeting. She has got a wonderful suggestion, like the mucormycosis. We should do a joint article on the diabetic retinopathy survey, and she suggested
Definitely.
like IGO, like you remember, you and me had done a survey and we could not complete it and publish
Yes.
it. So Dr. Rajwinder is ready to cooperate with you. So last meeting you were not
Definitely.
there.
Definitely.
So anyway, you
Thanks,
can-
Dr. Rajwinder. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
Nice meeting you.
Sir, I would like to contribute if it is possible. So
No,
we can
definitely.
collect data on a larger level so that we can publish the study.
Definitely, ma'am. Definitely. What you were asking about glitazons are, see, glitazons were banned for some time because of other toxicities which it had. But a couple of years back, it was again started. So they are not alone. Usually it's in a combination, people use it. However, this is a drug which can cause macular edema. So if a patient is on glitazon, you want to stop that drug. You have to tell your diabetic rather than glutazone. And if he's on glutazone and there is macular edema, you can even wait, stop the drug, call him again after 1 or 2 months and see if edema is going, you may not need injection. I think that is the message I wanted to give.
So does it mean that we have to routinely
Yes.
ask in the history that whether they are
Absolutely
on
true.
glitazone or not?
Absolutely true. Aditi had a question.
Yeah, Aditi. Aditi, unmute yourself.
No, that is
Acha.
raised since
Okay,
long.
Arpita.
Yeah, good evening. I just wanted to know what is like, where do you give, if at all you give Nepafenac or Bromofenac in the treatment, like if it's a mild NPDR with a very little DME, do you prefer all these drugs like Nepafenac or Bromofenac?
See, I will tell you, edema so what you should start doing is classifying edema into non-center involving, center involving.
No, if it is a, I'm sorry, but if it is a center involving, I'm saying.
If it is a center involving, you look into vision. If vision is good, you can observe. If he's an old age and if he has a severe stage of retinopathy, you can start on Nevenac or Bromfenac, whatever you are telling. However, make it sure that it should not be an indefinite. See, it's been very much misused, the non-steroidal. So definitely, the purpose of giving here is that you want to reduce the chances of center involving DME in future. His vision is anyway good. Vision will not improve, correct? So that's your reason of giving. But if there is no macular edema, definitely don't give. Just for mild diabetic retinopathy, non-proliferative, there is no role of giving Nevenac.
Okay. No, my question was mild NPDR with a center involving DME, but it's not exceeding like somewhat around 270 or 280, not exceeding 300 or something. So in that case, do you go for anti-VEGF?
No, definitely no. If the vision is good, definitely no.
Yeah.
If your vision is poor, you can give anti-VEGF if patient is symptomatic.
And how long do you wait for the response? Like 1 month or so? Like
For the anti-VEGF or for the
no,
Nevenac?
for the Nevenac, you give
See,
Nevenac.
as I
and
told
like,
you, the aim of Nevenac is not to resolve the macular edema. You must understand that. The aim here is we just are preventing it to further deteriorate. So whenever I start Nevenac, the aim is not that I'm looking at resolution of edema. I call him every month so that initially a month and then gradually increase to 3 months. The aim is I want to look whether he develops vision loss, because you want to give anti-VEGF only when there is a vision loss.
Yes.
Even if it is center involving, if there is no vision loss, continue him on Nevenac for 5-6 months. You can continue, making sure sometimes misuse, corneal toxicity and melting is also reported. So that is something you need to keep in mind. My usual choice in these cases, I will do an angiogram also. And sometimes if you have a focal leak, do a laser if it is non-central, like away from the fovea. Yeah.
Okay.
One thing I would like to say, compared to BD dose, single dose will be better. I mean, corneal toxicity reduced, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. What you're telling. Another problem of Nevenac is it's very sticky.
Yeah.
If you put this drop in your eye, because I have done that and it is very, very sticky. It's very inconvenient. I think that way Bromphenic, but no commercial interest here. But Bromphenic helps in reducing the dose and stickiness is not there.
Okay. Dr. Kata, you want to ask something?
Sir, I have got since long one question.
Please,
see, in diabetics, why one eye is much involved, why other eye is not involved? Much means same food, same medicine, same systemic diseases. One eye is macular edema, other eye is totally normal. Otherwise, one eye is PDR, other eye is macular edema. Any study, what is the cause for PDR and edema differentiate in the same body, with the same food, with the same systemic diseases, with the same treatment, with the same consultant? Thank you, sir.
Very good question, sir. I will give two things. One is, you said that both eye have different severity of disease.
Yeah.
Now, if it is 2 grades of retinopathy, like you have one eye has got mild and within 2 level, mild ke baad moderate and then it is severe. So within 2 levels of retinopathy, if both eyes are there, it is normal. Don't worry about it. But if we have more than difference, like one eye has got PDR, another has got a mild NPDR, you need to look for many factors. Palpate his carotid, because many times these patients will have a carotid artery disease. Now may have ocular ischemic syndrome, maybe having a high myopia, maybe having amblyopia, uveitis in that eye. So there are multiple reasons of what we call as asymmetric diabetic retinopathy. So definitely what you have taken about point is a very important point. Whenever you get asymmetric retinopathy, look into the factors which can be responsible. The second question which you had in your thing was, now DME with any stage of retinopathy is considered sight threatening. So yes, your question is, some people develop DME, some people go into what we call as proliferative retinopathy. There are multiple reasons and pathophysiologies, and Dr. Kunawaz actually tried answering this question, dividing some phenotypes. He said that you may have a leaky person or you may have more ischemic person. Looking at a couple of tests he used, but again, we don't use that in clinic because they are more theoretical. But definitely, as you said, we really don't have answer today why some eyes develop diabetic macular edema, some eyes they go proliferative, and some eyes have both proliferative retinopathy and diabetic macular edema.
Some do not have also after 30 years of diabetes.
Yes, that's again a thing. You have people who have 2 years diabetes with advanced disease, and you have a person who have 30 years diabetes, no
Without
disease.
anything.
There's a question in the chat box. There's a question in the chat box.
Yeah.
Is there a role of brolucizumab in diabetic macular edema and or related complications?
So Today it is not there because there is no evidence, but yes, there are trials going on. We were also part of one of the trial of diabetic macular edema. The information is that very recently the diabetic macular edema trials have been halted, probably because of the other ocular toxicity. The inflammation part was more. So today, as such, there is no role of brolucizumab. The only trial which was happening has been stopped. So I would caution you not to use in diabetic macular edema brolucizumab. Though it looks very interesting, the edema may come down, but these are the patients who already have some form of occlusive disease. And you definitely don't want them to get vascular occlusion and reduce vision.
Great. So, yes. Anybody else?
Any other?
Yes,
Yes, Kanabdi?
sir, my question is there any role of NSAIDs to prevent the diabetic macular edema in a pseudophakic eye with a diabetic retinopathy? Because sir, many physicians they prescribe Megabrom or Nepafenac.
Yes, there is a role. So it's not to prevent diabetic macular edema, but to prevent pseudophakic macular edema, Irwin gas.
Yes, sir.
There is definitely a role, and in diabetics we know that chance is more, and giving a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drops to these patients is a good idea.
Yes, sir.
However, not with the assumption that they will prevent diabetic macular edema.
Yeah.
Okay, sir.
So it will not be diabetic, it's the pseudophakic macular edema which will get prevented.
Sir, for how long we should prescribe it?
For pseudophakic, actually 2 months should be enough, 2 to 3 months. Usually the cataract surgeons, they prescribe for 2 to 3 months.
Yeah, usually we prescribe twice a day for 2 to 3 months after giving steroids for 1 week or 2 weeks.
Correct, absolutely correct, absolutely correct.
So role of oral indomethacin in DME. Somebody asked a question.
Role of oral
indomethacin. I think indomethacin is not being used nowadays.
No role of oral indomethacin in DME.
Yeah.
If we want to do cataract surgery and the patient is also having diabetic macular edema, so first we should give anti-VEGF, and after how many days we should do the cataract surgery?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what you need to do is first see whether the retina is seen. You want to first treat macular edema. You know that the severity of retinopathy, grade of retinopathy increases once your cataract surgery is done. Macular edema worsens after cataract surgery. So if there is a patient who comes with a pre-existing diabetic macular edema. In that case, if cataract is not very significant, treat with anti-VEGFs first, reduce the edema, then plan cataract surgery. If a patient comes who has a significant cataract and diabetic macular edema on treatment, so he has been already taking anti-VEGFs, these patients continue the same anti-VEGF, do a cataract surgery. You can give it in the same setting. There is no harm that you give the injection after, because 2 times otherwise patient has to go to theater. You can give it on the same setting and do your cataract surgery with anti-VEGF. Okay. However, if there is a patient who you don't know, there is a macular edema, he has not been previously treated much, and you are planning a cataract surgery, you don't know whether he will respond to anti-VEGF, you have a choice. You can do a cataract surgery with anti-VEGF or do it with steroid. No, so you want to look into other factors. How is the disc? Whether any family history of glaucoma? You want to rule out, you don't want to have a patient with Ozurdex having a high IOP. So in these cases, I prefer to give steroids.
If IVTA is going to stay, or we should not give IVTA if the patient does not afford?
IVTA is a good, we used to give lot. However, the only problem is the IOP and cataract. And if you give, rather than giving 0.4 milligrams, give 0.1 milligram, the chances are a bit less, but yes, IVTA also can be given.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Sheila, would you like to give some comments? Your comments? Unmute, please, unmute. Yes.
Excellent talk, Rajiv.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
Hello.
I was thinking only of the cataract, basically, which was there, what you discussed. That's something which we face, especially in total cataracts. No, you don't visualize at all. You can
So
only do
I
an
would,
ultrasound.
now ultrasound is very important. You need to do ultrasound in these cases. If the view is really bad, you definitely want to know there is no proliferative component, no tractional element. You definitely want to do ultrasound.
If you found that the tractional element, you would combine the posterior and anterior segment surgeries together.
Yes,
Or
in these cases, if suppose there is a tractional element which is seen, definitely plan it with your vitreoretinal surgeon. You may not only do a cataract surgery, you may do a vitreous surgery along with it.
Dr.
Yes,
Padmaja
sir.
is there? Is there Dr. Padmaja?
Dr. Katta wants to ask
Katta,
one question.
yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Please.
Sir, it is not a question, it is my comment, sir.
Yes.
See, art of counseling in the patient language as early as possible prevents so many diabetic repairs and work to all ophthalmologists and prolongs life. So I mean, art of counseling in patient language showing such pathological photos is necessary through the government, through the society, at this need to the world. Thank you, sir.
Fully agree with you.
Thank
I
you.
100% endorse it.
Thank you, sir, for your
Another
comments.
small
Yes.
tip is, which I do is like, see, these patients, you want them to come every month for their injections. So make it sure that their injection experience is a pleasant experience. I think one bad experience one patient has, a large subconjunctival hematoma or a hemorrhage or pain during injection, he will never come for the second injection. I think that's something you must so all my diabetic patients where I know they will come every month, put the speculum only when you are injecting. Don't ask your assistant to put speculum and you are scrubbing. No, so that's a painful procedure. Put adequate amount of topical anesthesia. These are small tips, but they go a long way. And I usually, though you can give it injection even without a microscope, if anyway you are giving in theater, good idea to do it under a microscope to avoid these large vessels which cause a hemorrhage, because that's very irritating to the patient. He will never get, second time he will think 10 times that that blood spot took 10 days to go. Correct?
Yes.
I think Rajiv, it was an excellent talk. And I have one aspect is that sometimes when you have refractory diabetic macular edema, just based on only an OCT, when you see that 2 times, 3 times it is happening, apart from whatever the history elaborate, sometimes we can have conditions like, especially if you do an angiogram, if it is non-leaking macular edema. So sometimes it can be conditions like chronic myeloid leukemia, multiple myeloma.
Absolutely
These are
true.
the conditions also can cause a refractory diabetic macular edema. So that's why just doing a simple complete blood picture in any baseline along with the diabetic profile and can be a very useful test, because these are some things. And then in the fundus, you might find an unusual hemorrhages like flame-shaped hemorrhages, Roth spots like thing, and then you have macular edema. Then you need to think that there could be an underlying this hematological abnormality, which you might be picking up.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. I think that's a very important pearl which Dr. Padmaja has given. These are the cases. So in general, the moment you see a edema not responding, before thinking of doing any ocular thing, look at a patient as a whole.
Correct.
That how is it, other things, are we missing some other problem which is there inside, or get his all parameters done. You may be knowing that maybe a very poorly controlled all systemic parameters. You don't have to worry more about macular edema in these cases.
And steroids probably also can be given in pregnant women, because anti-VEGF growth we don't have.
I didn't cover the pregnancy, though I had mentioned initially. So it all depends in pregnancy when the patient comes with macular edema.
Correct.
So if it is in the 3rd trimester, the patient is coming with a diabetic macular edema, don't treat. because the moment pregnancy is over, macular edema will resolve.
Correct.
If patient is coming early in the pregnancy and your patient has diabetic macular edema, that is a time you start thinking you don't want the edema to be on the longer side time, because that will compromise the visual outcome. These are the cases steroids should be done. Definitely avoid anti-VEGF. Either steroids, but these are young ladies, lens is clear. We are also worried about cataract and other things. Laser is not a bad choice. So initial pregnancy, do laser. Late pregnancy, watch. Even if you have to give anti-VEGF as a dire thing, you don't want to do laser, the safest time is the third trimester. But as I told you, third trimester, there is no need, you can watch also.
So as this program is mainly aimed at general ophthalmologists, so what should be the take-home message? Till how long they can observe patients with the diabetic macular edema, and when should they refer to retinologist for intervention?
Yes, as compared to choroidal neovascular membrane or AMD, diabetic macular edema is a bit forgiving. Like even if patient doesn't come for 1 or 2 months, he will not become blind. But any diabetic macular edema, first thing is try to classify center involving, non-center involving. If it is center involving, definitely refer. If it is non-center involving and you are sure about your classification, staging of retinopathy, you can observe them, or as I told, the other methods of vision is good. But as I told you here, it's a very forgiving disease. 1 or 2 months, if you are delaying it, patient will not become blind. But yes, that's an indication for referral.
Number one. Second thing is they should also take care of the systemic factors.
Absolutely.
And to control them first also before referring also. So that
Absolutely.
will also help in resolving retinopathy, the macular edema.
Just one more last point I think I didn't cover was the injection. When to give, what are the systemic parameters to look when you are giving an injection? So one is the blood sugar. So here I'm not talking about the efficacy, but I'm more talking about safety of injection.
Yes.
So like AIOS guidelines for cataract surgery, even for more than 200, you don't want to inject. You want to control that first. As far as BP, it is hypertensive urgency. You don't want to inject. What is urgency? That is defined as 180 by 110. So if it is more than that, you don't want to inject. You want to control that first. Probably even in the theater, you can control and then inject. I think these are the two things which I missed, and that's something you must know. It's true for any injection, not only for diabetic macular edema, but any intravitreal injection.
Any injections.
Sir, any
So-
comments? Any comments in children, diabetic children?
Diabetic children, though majority of these children have type 1 diabetes, now we also have type 2 diabetes in children. But diabetic macular edema, usually we don't see in the early childhood. They all come when they are teenage. That is the time they come with proliferative retinopathy. That's in type 1 diabetes. But the type 2 children, they sometimes present, the type 2 obese and the other risk factors who are there. They sometimes can present, but to develop any of these changes, it takes a couple of years and a poor glycemic control. So usually it is not, but once if they present type 2 younger ones, you treat it like the adult one. It's exactly the same way.
Thank you, sir. Thank
Okay.
you.
I think let us wrap up.
Refer.
Yeah, Savishachi, yours. Yeah, now yours.
No, that's correct, but I request all the participants to respond in the form that has been sent, the link, comments, your response.
Dr. Rajvinder had a question on any cut limit for HbA1c. It's a very good question. Very good question. The cut limit is, see, one is for, you're looking for HbA1c for control. No, your diabetic retinopathy part, you want it less than 8. That's what in our population-based study we found the cutoff for differentiating a sight-threatening retinopathy with non-sight-threatening retinopathy is 8. However, and even for intravitreal injection, now the evidence is that you keep it controlled, the response is better. For safety of injection, we don't take into account HbA1c. We take into account in India, we take into account the RBS or the blood sugar. In UK, they take into account HbA1c. More than 8, they don't inject. The problem is, in our country, if you do HbA1c, majority of them are more than 8. And then you cannot inject for next 3 months. So that's the biggest problem. And it's a bit dicey that with a higher HbA1c, if you inject, court of law, what they will say. So the current guidelines is based on blood sugar, but for your good control of diabetic retinopathy as well as the response to treatment, HbA1c is an important parameter.
Okay, so thank you very much.
So there is one more question, no?
Yeah.
Dr. This one, some Anupriya from Bathinda. Sir, for safety of injection, blood sugar level are less than 200. Which levels to be seen? Fasting blood sugar levels are random?
Random.
It's random. Yeah.
Usually when you call the patient for injection, you don't want a hypoglycemia. You ask him to eat probably an hour before. So it's usually a random sugar.
Right.
They are my postgraduate students.
Very
Sure.
good. Very good. Madam,
Very good.
I think I'm happy as a professor, you are encouraging them to ask questions. This is what we want.
Thank you. Yes.
There is a saying in the world, sir. Indians eat more of sweets, especially Rajasthan. Why don't the government involve in such manufacturing when compared to sweets of all global countries? This is a saying not from me, saying from my daughters, my friends, all abroad. What is your comment, sir?
Dr. Kata, the person who was doing that Manik Chand, he's a Marwadi from Pune, and he was my patient. And finally, he got cancer. And Sharad Pawar got cancer. So they got a PIL and banned Manik Chand in Maharashtra. And similarly, we have to file a PIL. That is what we are working on, even crackers in India. So for that, you cannot ask the government, because government is made by people like you and me. So like I may be corrupt and you may be good. What is the use? If the chief minister is corrupt, what will you do? I am the chief minister and I will be corrupt. What is the problem? I know it's recording going on, but I think it's the problem. So I have 5 fingers are not same, and I think you have to file a PIL. Definitely, you cannot tell the government to do.
But Dr. Katta, by sincere request, don't file a PIL for sweets.
To file a PIL, ban the sweets. Only in Rajasthan, Rajiv. You are in
Only in Rajasthan, not in Tamil Nadu.
No, if anybody gives good study results, I am ready to put PIL. But I need a study results like people like Natarajan and Raju Raman and etc. top people. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for the comments. Yeah. Right. So
from Echo India, I think Deepa Rani has put requesting everybody to fill up the feedback form.
So, and also all the spokes to become the members of Teleto Society of India.
And Rajiv, I have only one question. That extrapolating this incidence of diabetic macular edema, how many people are suffering from diabetic macular edema today?
Very difficult to say, but whatever literature says.
Extrapolating.
I think Padmaja should cover that in epidemiology next session. 30%.
I have a reason.
30%. Yeah.
Yes, I will cover in my next.
No, I know that, but 30% is equal to how many patients?
You to 5 million
like for
patients.
example, if you, what we tell in simple form is that if you see 100 people with diabetes, 20 will have some form of diabetic retinopathy. In that, 10 people can be expected to have diabetic macular edema, around 8 to 10. And around 1 or 2 people will have
70 million, 7
diabetes.
million. So you'll have 7 million people with DME.
I'm saying we have only 23,000 ophthalmologists registered in All India Ophthalmic Society. So where are the 7 million? We have to dig them out so that all doctors get money as professional fee, all pharmaceuticals get the drug, and patients get vision. So this is what we have to make. It is like Einstein doing a theoretical physics. You, me, and Padmaja have to write an article. Theoretical. These 7 million people means so much of revenue can be made by government in the way of tax, and then you can, as Dr. Katta says, that instead of eating sweet, instead of paying that, you paying fine, you can reduce the production by 10%, whatever, or 50%, so that can come to diabetes. It is like a tobacco statutory warning. The statutory warning can come in all the sugar things, so that everybody, whether they read or not, even the tobacco, there's a big advertisement going on. And I think we have to find out how many people are going blind. In cancer, people are dying. So when they are dying, I have nothing to do later. But here, the fellow will be living and having a blindness. I want to make a dramatic news in the form of films, division, movies, or this thing. So I think we have to tell the truth, because this is the truth. 7 million people will have an eye problem, and we are only 23,000. Imagine, daily you see even 20 diabetic macular edema new patient. You'll be a rich man.
Yeah.
And where and Intas, everybody will be rich. And second, finally, the people will have money, vision. This is what I'm trying to tell.
Correct, correct.
That should be the concluding remark, and I think we can close, Dr. And somehow, sir, should RBS be checked even prior to PRP? Dr. Aditi Parashar has asked.
Yes.
1 minute. What is the question, sir?
No,
Should RBS be checked even prior to PRP? No, not required. Yes, you want to know the glycemic level, but you don't need to do a RBS before doing a PRP. PRP, you can still go ahead doing your routine treatment. In injection or any intraocular procedure or a surgery, you are worried about why you want to check RBS, why you want to have good control, because they have more chance of infections. That is the worry you have. As I told you, it's for the safety. Yeah.
Yes. So I think first question is really great. So you are like our Sachin Tendulkar.
Yeah.
So when is the next session, Subudhi?
It is 28th, sir.
23rd.
21st.
And who's the speaker?
Dr. Padmaja, I think. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Padmaja. So have this in mind and put some nice slides like the Rajiv saying that what will be the numbers where ophthalmologists have to deal. That means GPs, general practitioners, everybody has to deal.
Sure.
So that you can also calculate somebody should do it. Good.
Next talk is the 21st July.
Yeah.
Padmaja, Dr. Padmaja is the talk.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, see you again on 21st July. Dr. Padmaja, be ready.
Dr. Katta, we can tell sweet dreams, no?
Yeah, sir. It is another information. Art of counseling in patient language is my article. I have submitted to IJO. It is in peer review. In international book available in Amazon.
Okay.
Very good.
Great.
Sir, are you diabetic? Dr. Katta, sir, are you diabetic?
No. I don't have any problem, sir. I am healthy because of Natarajan, because of Raju Raman. They have educated me.